Events of the past week involving former President Jacob Zuma and his supporters have raised question marks about the conduct of police. Hours before the midnight deadline, when Zuma is expected to either hand himself over or face arrest, it's still unclear whether the SAPS would indeed go and arrest him as per the Constitutional Court's order. This coming amid criticism from certain quarters who felt police were rendered impotent at the weekend, standing by, watching while Zuma supporters broke the country's laws, threatened and intimidated people. Police Minister Nkandla was, of course, quick to defend the men in blue, saying theirs was to avoid the spilling of blood and unnecessary confrontation. Our guest this evening cut to the chase. Should the police arrest the former president if indeed he doesn't hand himself over by midnight? What does the law say police should do? Were the police really avoiding another Marikana last weekend, or was their explanation simply an excuse for, in fact, never acting on the recommendations that were made years ago to avoid another Marikana? Later on, we'll also speak to the group that has been dubbed Jacob Zuma's private army, and that's the MKMVA, about whether they've now been demobilized now that the ANC has acted against their spokesperson, Niehaus. The Watchdog starts now. Well, Puseletso is a lawyer who's going to help us navigate the issue that is preoccupying a lot of South Africans this hour, and that is the issue of what happens to former President Jacob Zuma, whether the police in the event he doesn't hand himself over should go and arrest him. Puseletso, good evening. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Your understanding of what the court ordered the police to do in the event the former president, as is now likely to be the case, it doesn't hand himself over by midnight.
Good evening to the viewers. I think it's quite clear that on the 29th of June, the court made an order and directed both the president to hand himself over, failing which the police has 3 days to arrest him. And so effectively, the police have about 4 hours within which to arrest President Zuma. And that's just the law. That's where it stands at the moment. That decision stands. It hasn't changed. There's no judgment that removes it. There's no direction of the Constitutional Court that amends it or varies it, and it stands. Thank you.
Well, the JG Zuma Foundation has posted on its Twitter account, it reads in part, the foundation wishes to inform the nation that a letter has been sent to the Constitutional Court to issue a directive prohibiting the execution of the arrest order pending the outcome of all legal processes. Does that letter have any standing?
Not at all, Budbuyo. I mean, it's as inappropriate as the one that was sent by the police to the Concord. When President Zuma made an application for the rescission of that judgment last week, it should have been part of that application that the court, whilst waiting for its decision on the rescission, should then suspend the arrest. This was not done either by President Zuma or by the Concord in terms of its own suspension of the order that it had made. And so this letter then is just a letter, first of all. And I mean, what is the Concord expected to respond and do? By another letter as well? And what do we call those processes? So the Concord is a court, and it must therefore respond in the manner that courts do. And it has done so by giving judgment on the 29th, and then later by giving that directive on the 3rd of July. Thank you.
Now, in what, about 3 hours' time, well, less than 3 hours, assuming it is indeed true that the police who have been seen or allegedly been seen making their way to Nkandla will indeed be getting there at some point over the next 3 hours. If they do indeed get there, what do? Arrest him, finish him clear?
Well, that is the law. And so they would be acting in accordance with the law, fulfilling their duties, their constitutional duties, as clarified and directed by the Constitutional Court. Failure to do that would, in my opinion, very humble opinion, mean that they are in contempt of court, right? If they don't arrest him. Now, it's one thing to attend and try and issues occur and then they fail to arrest him. It's another to altogether refuse to. If they refuse, it's contempt. If they try, I think we can then perhaps forgive that.
What happens if, whether it's the National Police Commissioner or the Minister of Police or both, say, well, we deployed in case, just in case, or in the event, we really have to be forced to do this. But hey, Concord, do you mind having a look at that letter that we sent you before we do anything? Can they do that?
No, they can't. They should have made a formal application to the Concord to request an extension of the days that have been given by the Concord. Because again, it becomes inappropriate for the Concord to write a letter in response and say, no, we are now amending our order via a letter. It has to give a directive due to formal processes that have been brought before it, failing which it cannot act. So again, the order then stands of the 29th, and it must be executed by the police. The Concord is the ultimate guardian of the Constitution, and in this case, they've sought to enforce the Constitution as best as they can and protect it. So what we really have here is an issue of legal certainty, and we must then try and follow the law to the letter. If we're all equal above the law.
Are you among those people who feel that it's too little, too late for Jacob Zuma now? He remained hostile, he refused to comply with the Concord order, so he must just go present himself or wait to be arrested?
No, I think the time for him to present himself expired, and he should therefore be arrested. As the Constitutional Court, the apex court of the country, has directed. It's not so much an issue of feeling that President Zuma, one way or the other, is like this or like that. The real issue here is that at the heart of the issue is whether the law is the law, whether the law applies equally amongst all citizens. You know, I mean, this issue of the police reminds me really of the President Omar Bashir matter, where the High Court had directed and given an order that he should be arrested, and he was not arrested. At the time, the police and others made the argument that no, President al-Bashir was protected under international law in terms of his immunity as a sitting president and so forth. This was found not to be true, but nonetheless, the president was not arrested. He was further smuggled out of the country, and all sorts of things happened. So, yes, sort of.
Okay.
Were you saying something?
No. I wasn't saying anything. Did you want to finish your thought there?
No, yes. So I'm saying then the implications then were less than the ones I foresee in this matter if the president is not arrested. We will truly have a constitutional crisis because you will have a case where the Constitutional Court, which is the only body that can really, the ultimate body that can tell us what the Constitution says on certain matters, and it has pronounced on this, then it gives direction, and that direction is not followed. The question is what must happen now? So I think he really should be arrested and get the matter out of the way. Not because he's President Zuma, but because there is a standing judgment that must be followed. And for legal certainty, this is absolutely critical.
Well, speaking of that, not because he is President Zuma, I'm reminded of comments people have been making over the past couple of days, some arguing that what would be the point of arresting him today in the event the court on Friday, the Pietermaritzburg court on Friday, rules in his favor, and those who would have supported his arrest would be left with egg on their faces. Does that even arise? Even if it does it even matter?
It really doesn't matter. The court in Maritzburg, in my opinion, should have given an order yesterday. Because I think the matter is quite clear. The president's issue, it's very settled that decisions of higher courts are binding on lower courts. So that decision by the Constitutional Court binds all of us, including the High Court in Maritzburg. It knows this. And in any case, the order that is now currently standing, says President Zuma must be arrested by today. There is no order, whether correctly or incorrectly, that says otherwise. Failure to then follow that order is to break the law, right? And so that's really at the core of what the issue is about. We mustn't allow ourselves to be misdirected by issues of what will happen on Friday or will not happen on Friday. The future is not the issue. As things stand, the Constitutional Court has made an order. What should happen in relation to executing that order?
And the police have a job to do and not ask any questions.
A little too late in this instance. And in any case, if you want to ask questions, this is not the manner that you do it in. The Constitutional Court is not there to interpret its own judgments unless it is in its formal process. So it can't give a very clear order such as the one it gave on the 29th and thereafter come back and write a letter explaining what it meant with the judgment. The judgment is clear. The points raised by the police are neither here nor there, right? The issues of violence and stability and all of that are really neither here nor there. And especially as it relates to what the Constitutional Court must do. Those may be relevant for people who are concerned with state security and the like, including those police intelligence and the likes, who must make an assessment on the best approach to execute the order, and not make an assessment on the best approach to avoid the order. So with all of those issues considered, how do they best execute that order? That's really their job. The Constitutional Court cannot then be brought into the matter, which is really a political issue.
The how-tos.
The how-tos, exactly. They are not security experts. The Constitutional Court judges are not security experts. They're not there for that. They're there to interpret the Constitution and give the best judgment that they can with the context they have at their disposal.
That's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much, Puseletso Sauli, for your views this evening. Puseletso not beating about the bush, telling it the way he sees it. Do you have a different view? Well, to contact us on our Twitter account or on Facebook. Of course, this is not the only issue that police have been criticized for. They have also been faced criticism from certain quarters who felt that last weekend they didn't really do what they were supposed to do in terms of managing the crowd. They merely stood by while Zuma's supporters broke the country's laws, threatened and intimidated people. Of course, Bheki Cele, the police minister, on Monday, quick to defend the men in blue, saying theirs was to avoid the spilling of blood and unnecessary confrontation. Our next guest is going to tell us whether, in fact, he thinks that the police should be given the benefit of a doubt, that they did the best thing that they could do at the weekend, given what they were confronted with. And is going to dig deep into history. He is among people who have written, or at least co-authored, reports that look into how to best equip police to do what they are supposed to do without, of course, or avoiding at the same time, unnecessary spilling of blood and confrontation. That's our next guest. The program continues in a moment. Don't go away. Police got a lot of criticism at the weekend for the way they acted or didn't act in front of those spear and gun-wielding supporters of former President Jacob Zuma. The explanation from the minister after a report that he got from the police was that police had to avoid another Marikana. Were police indeed avoiding another Marikana, or was theirs simply an explanation, an excuse rather, for in fact not acting on recommendations that were made a long time ago by various groups of people on the back of the Marikana massacre? Now, joining me now is Themba Masuku. Themba Masuku is a co-author of a report that was put together by a group of civil society members of the Marikana panel of experts on policing and crowd management. It's going to help us decode some of the things that often get said by the police, but also give us insights into, the state of policing in our country, thrown up by the events of the weekend. Mr. Masuku, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. Now, together with your colleagues, on the back of the Commission of Inquiry, you were asked, as the civilians you were, but who had insights into policing, to really look at the recommendations, what came out of the report, the recommendations that were made, and really advise the police on what can be done to avoid the situation that we saw in Marikana, but to also help the police do their job. Take us through what you went through before you commenced, before you even put recommendations on the table. What was the process that you embarked upon as that group of civilians?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers at home, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this important discussion. So we were appointed by cabinet. We were appointed to on the back of the recommendation by the Falam Commission, which basically recommended that cabinet must appoint people who have policing experience to deal with a number of issues. One of the issues that we had to deal with was to look at the policing and the extent to which policing is equipped to deal with armed crowds or crowds that are armed with sharp weapons and firearms. Mm-hmm. And the other issues were related to the use of R5s and automatic rifles, and to deal with the issues of training, and also to look at whether there was sufficient standing orders and instructions, and to make recommendations that will strengthen the policing of crowds in South Africa. So that was basically the thrust mm-hmm. of why of what the Falam Commission had recommended. So together with a number of policing experts in this country, and with people also from Russia, the Australia, Zimbabwe, and police officers, the generals here in South Africa, who formed part of that panel of experts. And we did produce a report which made several recommendations of what need to be done to avoid a situation like Marikana. Mm-hmm. So if you want me to zoom into the events of the weekends, we could do so, but also to mention that one of the many things that we had to do as a panel was to understand exactly what had transpired in Marikana. What is it that it caused the kind of massacre that unfolded? So we did make visits to Marikana to understand the dynamics, and really where people were assassinated. It's a copy away from residential areas. So to the extent that there was no very strong basis why the kind of force that was used was actually absolutely necessary. So there are a number of recommendations. For example, the situation on the ground. The question would have been: did it warrant the kind of force that was required? You could have allowed people to stay in that copy for until they're tired. And what would have happened? Nothing would have happened. So the attempt to use force was completely unwarranted, was completely unnecessary.
Which is how you arrived among your conclusions to one that said that because of the failure of the top leadership of the police, but also inappropriate political considerations, the police then, we ended up with the death of so many people.
Yes, there were many other factors as well. Factors such as, for example, was there a plan in place? What plan did it seek to achieve? So who was in command? Did the person who was in command have the requisite experience in managing crowds? There were questions around, for example, who gave the order? If instructions were given from Pretoria, did they actually have a good understanding of the dynamics that were happening on the ground? Why was negotiation by the provincial commissioner, for example, why did she advise the loanmen, for example, not to negotiate with miners? So there were a number of issues that would have contributed to the massacre. But I think, importantly, was that all experts, even those that presented their views in Marikana or made submissions to the Marikana Commission, was that there's no space in the public order management or crowd management for police carrying automatic rifles, particularly R5s. So that was very important. And the fact that we're seeing less and less of those kind of weapons in crowd management situations, it's a very good step in the right direction. No one should be killed for exercising a right, because they remember in a protest action, there are many competing rights that are in place, fundamental rights that are protected. So it's not only the rule of law that is in play here, it's the right to life, and many other rights that are protected. So the totality of a policing operation should factor all those factors. And remember, force and lethal force in particular can only be used in certain situations, in certain circumstances. Circumstances where there's imminent threat to police lives or lives of other people. Then police would be legally authorized to use the kind of force that would have seen in Marikana. Now, in the absence of that, that kind of force could not be justifiable in a democratic South Africa.
Now, I've been speaking to a few insiders who have really made that point very clearly and quite forcefully, that preservation of life is very important, but also of chaos, because chaos then breeds a whole lot of other things. Confusion, people don't know where to go, what to do, they run, and it becomes a very undesirable, if not dangerous, situation. Which then brings us to the issue of planning, which then is going to take us to the events of the past weekend. We had a situation where the people who went to Nkandla made their intentions known long before the weekend. And some of them could be seen on social media brandishing weapons, and telling whoever cared to listen what it was that they were meant to do there, whatever it took to do that. Now, you would have then thought that the police would plan, which brings us to the issue of planning, because one of the big problems with Marikana was that there was no indication that there was proper planning actually went into the whole thing. What happens if X, Y, Z happens, and so on. Now, when we ask the police to take us, through what they did in the run-up to the weekend events, we are told those are operational matters that police cannot get into. With your expert knowledge, with the lessons that we ought to have learned from Marikana, what ought to have gone into the kind of planning that would have been needed for the scenario that played itself out on Saturday and Sunday at Nkandla?
Right, that's a very important question. So if I can just maybe just mention one issue in Marikana that was completely absent in the planning, was that the plan itself that was put in place, it was not a plan to preserve life. It was a plan to take away lives. So force was part of that plan. Mm. So I would have imagined that one of the issues in the event in Nkandla leading to the weekend would have involved a lot of police identifying the level of threats and where the threats could have been coming from, and identifying people that you referred to that would have been in the media brandishing firearms and basically arresting those. Because remember that essentially the protest that is protected is one that is peaceful, where no one is carrying weapons, and in particular firearms. So I would have imagined that a lot of effort would have been made to identify and mitigate those kind of threats. But essentially, if one looks at the conduct of people that gathered in Nkandla, they were violating disaster management regulations. There's no doubt about that the regulations were violated. But essentially, we did not see any violence. We did not see any destruction of property or any people being injured or of that sort. So essentially, when there is no threat to life, based on the situational analysis that the police would have conducted on that day, even if they had an operational plan that would have suggested, that would have required certain things, the plan could have been fluid in a sense that it now factors in that essentially no one knew how many people were coming to Nkandla, for example. Police would not have known that, how many people would come, and the kind of character of people that would be coming. All they would have been prepared for is to make sure that in the event there is violence, this is how they would react. And part of the reaction would have been a reaction to preserve life. I think that's the one thing that our policing system has missed for a very long time, where even there's been incidents where a robber is running away and is killed. That is not a policing that we want in a democracy. When someone is not posing any threat to life, to your life, the law does not require a police officer to discharge a firearm in a manner that kills that person, because essentially we want police that preserve lives, not that takes away life. So the rule of law, yes, it was violated, and it would be within the police purview to make sure that those that are committed any criminal offense are brought to book. But the conduct of the police on that day followed everything that we've recommended to the police in terms of dealing with the people that are armed and brandishing dangerous weapons, that you need to de-escalate the situation in a manner that preserves lives. And you have all the time to effect those arrests. As people, for example, were going back, there could have been roadblocks, there could have been a number of things that could have been done as people were moving away from the area, and they would have been arrested in that way, in a manner that did not affect. Remember in the crowd, there were children, there were elderly, there were women, and the kind of these calls from people that are saying police should have acted in a manner that use force. It's not the kind of policing that we're looking for in a democracy. We're looking for policing that respects the sanctity of life and the dignity of human beings.
But I mean, is force the only option that police are left with? Because you also need to balance everything against the effectiveness of the police to actually make sure that people uphold the law, or the laws of obey the laws of the country, and you can't render them impotent, where they are seen to be helpless, because then the next offender will say, "Why are you picking on me?" Look at, because the same issue arose when there was taxi violence in places like the Eastern Cape, for example, where for the most part the police were nowhere to be seen. We're still waiting for a report to, that the minister said he would be given as to what actually happened there. But I mean, as a law enforcement agency, they have to be seen to be doing their work, and there is no way you can have people undermining the police or doing as they please in front of the police, knowing fully well that there will be no consequences. So without having to shoot people, what else can police do, to really demonstrate that they are on top of the situation and they are managing it, and no one gets to get away, with disobeying the laws or running roughshod, over the interests of law and order and a whole lot of other things?
I mean, absolutely, I agree with you. Force is not the only available kind of remedy that the police have. Like I suggested to you that, during the gathering that was not sanctioned in Nkandla, police would have deployed a number of police officers in plainclothes, for example, who would have identified people either carrying firearms or carrying dangerous weapons and all those things, and those people can be brought to book as and when those people are identified. So the issue is that police, they would have been, their operation would have been informed by that situation on the ground. The situation was such that there was a possibility of escalation of violence. If that was a possibility, then they needed to de-escalate the situation in a manner that preserves lives. I don't think that disempowers or that casts aspersions on the ability of the police. In fact, it is the police it is the kind of police that we want, that is able to de-escalate a situation that is volatile to preserve life. I've used an example, for example, of a robber who is running away. There is no dignity in the police, or there is no bravado in the police when they shoot that person who's running away, who's posing no imminent threat to a police officer to be shot. Because remember, the sanctity of life is protected. So the number of competing rights fundamental rights that are protected, that police have to observe not just the rule of law, but many other rights were at play, including fundamentally the right to life and the right to dignity.
Now, the recommendations you and your team made don't seem to have really made it to, Parliament, and whereafter, the right decisions could then be made so that we can begin to create the kind of police service that we would all wish that this country could have. It's been years now. I mean, you submitted your report in 2018. Still there's no evidence as yet as to whether those recommendations have actually been taken up to as South Africans or in South African parlance. Now, what do you think is happening there?
Right, I'm not privy to what is going on there, simply because I'm not in that environment. But the one thing one can use anecdotal kind of evidence to say what are some of the changes that we're seeing. One of the things that give me comfort sometimes is that there has been de-escalation of force during public order situations. You would remember, for example, was it a year or 2 years ago when, for example, police were confronted by a situation in the CBD of Johannesburg, and they were able to retreat. They were able to retreat, and I'm aware that they received a lot of backlash from society. Yes. That they needed to fund the situation. But the situation was such that if they had responded, people would have been killed. So there is evidence that, for example, you rarely see police officers these days in public order situations brandishing automatic rifles, for example. It's one of the things that we recommended, that automatic rifles have no place in crowd management situations. The other area is that's very important, the area of training and the area of ensuring that there's adequate capacity and capability and skills within the public order environment.
Is that happening?
I'm not privy to, for example, whether there has been more people brought into that kind of environment. But the briefing, obviously, that we received from the minister when we handed over the report, or when the report was made public, was assuring that a lot of effort is being made within the SABC environment to implement several recommendations, including strengthening the capability and the capacity of public order police to basically to conduct public order policing in a manner that is compliant with human rights and the recommendations from the panel of experts.
Mr. Masuku, thank you very much for your time and your insights this evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
He is, of course, the program manager for the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. After the break, we'll speak to the group that's been dubbed Jacob Zuma's private army, and that's the MKMVA, about whether they have now been demobilized. As many of you would know by now, the ANC has clipped their spokesperson Carl Niehaus's wings. So what happens to the rest of the MKMVA? The Watchdog continues right after this.
All members of the ANC are expected to conduct themselves at all times in accordance with their voluntary oath of membership and desist from conduct that may bring the organization into disrepute. So we just felt that we must give yourselves updates, because indeed a letter has been written to Comrade Carl. He has since received that, conveying this decision. Because sometimes the media would come back to us and say, You always speak about taking action, but we never really get to see these actions that are being spoken about in the African National Congress. We can assure members of the media that when the ANC takes decisions, it does go to act on those.
ANC spokesperson there, Pulemabe, addressing the media a little earlier following the suspension of Niehaus, who is the spokesperson of the Nkandla Military Veterans Association. And joining me now is KB Mapatwa, who is the leader of the MKMVA. Good evening, Mr. Mapatwa. Thanks very much for your time. Perhaps first, your response or a comment on Niehaus' suspension?
Evening, Vuyo and 404 viewers. Look, it caught us by surprise, the suspension of Comrade Niehaus, because yesterday the NEC read the statement and resolutions of the NEC, and they did not mention Niehaus. So if it is a decision really that is afterthought, because it was supposed to be mentioned by the DSG, Comrade Jesse Tuartias, as a resolution of the NEC, why today do they send the spokesperson to come and pronounce on the suspension of Comrade Niehaus? Is it an afterthought? But let me make it clear. We are the ones, after our NEC last week, Thursday, who sent Comrade Niehaus to Nkandla to go and give direction to our comrades who were there on the ground, because we saw that there were a little bit of no command and control from our members, not other people, but to our members only. So what he said there, it was on behalf of MKMVA, not because of his own statements. And we're all saying consistency. We will act within the confines of the law. And that's what Carl has been saying in the statements. So we don't understand this charging of Comrade Carl. And that's why we're saying it's just like even the disbandment of MKMVA, that it is because our NEC is taking issues now with emotions because of our consistent and principled support on former President Jacob Zuma.
Were you really surprised, even though the ANC statement really had some strong words, both in terms of condemning what happened there under your watch, but also, you know, saying that they don't expect the kind of behavior that they've seen from you? Let me read here something here that says, the NEC has reaffirmed our understanding that we consciously chose a democratic system and constitutional dispensation. The statement goes on to say that the counter-revolutionary calls for violence and even civil war, parading of armed groups, flagrant display of weapons and firing of guns, as well as the activities, particularly of individuals operating under the banner of the Nkandla Military Veterans Association. So strong words, you know. Further down the statement, they are then saying that what you should preoccupy yourselves with is the decision of the NWC to immediately disband the MKMVA and the MK Council, you know, and the establishment of an MK Veterans Unity Conference Preparatory Committee and the 60th Anniversary Committee. Those are the programs you should be preoccupying yourselves with, and not being, as some people have put it, the former president's private army.
Now, I think we don't agree with the statements of the NEC of calling us to an extent of counter-revolutionaries. Let them ask us a report what happened there. What did they see MK doing there? We did nothing wrong as MKMVA there. It's because of our principle, I repeat, it's because of our principle support on former President Jacob Zuma. There is nothing that you can prove and show us this is what MKMVA did. And we're not parading ourselves as a private army there. This uniform, it is what we are left with as our heritage. Because the same organization, the ANC, has failed us since from 1994. Our comrades are dying as paupers. We have been crying, complaining to the ANC as an association, and they expect us to do what? It is the ANC that is in government that must make sure that it looks after the welfare of our comrades.
And you were deputy minister in that government?
A useless deputy minister without powers, only enjoying blue lights. And even my powers were taken away by the minister because I was very vocal that the process of empowering or dealing with the plight of the ex-combatants is moving very slow, and our comrades are getting impatient. That is why we see them marching every day, sometimes to an extent that they even lose patience and do things in an illegal way. And that's what we don't want. And that's what should preoccupy the African National Congress, rather than attacking us when we talk about our plights, when we talk about in the manner that they are treating us. They are treating us as stepchildren of the ANC. They are not treating us equally like other structures, including the disbandment. The ANC, when it disbands its structures, it goes to the regions first and come back and consult with the NWC, and they take a popular view to the NEC. With us, people, they just call a special NEC meeting and saying, you are disbanded, without telling us what are the reasons. We've been asking, tell us the reasons of disbandment. They close the meetings. So what must we do? That is why we had our NEC even today that finished earlier before this meeting. That we have reaffirmed ourselves that we don't recognize that disbandment as MKMVA because firstly, it's unprocedural, firstly, it is unconstitutional, because there's no way you will find MKMVA in the constitution of the ANC. But that's not where we want to go legally. We want to pursue and persuade the ANC politically that they must not take issues personally or on the emotions. So MKMVA did nothing there. But we are going to be principled and support the African National Congress, but ANC must also treat us equally like other structures of the ANC.
Was that you could have rejected the blue lights and the PECs and the salary and everything that went with being a deputy minister in solidarity with your comrades. I think perhaps you could have made your point a lot stronger that way.
I did write a letter to the president complaining about, look, the minister has taken the powers, the delegated powers from me. Remember, deputy ministers are ceremonial. They don't have powers. They are delegated powers by the minister. So the ministers are the ones that have the powers. So those delegated powers were taken away from me by the minister. And I complained, I wrote to the president that, can you resolve this thing, President? What am I going to do now? Because what I was doing, I was going to the provinces, engaging with the premiers, that there is not only the national government that can deal with the plight of the ex-combatants, including our own comrades who are deployed in government. They are doing nothing in support of ex-combatants, including in the provinces. That is why the president has established a presidential task team now, led by the deputy president, and we are participating in those processes. And we hope this process, this time around, after 27 years of our freedom, they will deliver what is expected from the African National Congress.
Very quick one, we have run out of time. What is the MKMVA, or what are you asking your MKMVA comrades to do in the event President Jacob Zuma gets arrested this evening?
Look, it will be a sad day to South Africa. It will be a sad day to the African National Congress. It will be a sad day for to MKMVA and to those who are like-minded people thinking like us, and to all those who love President Jacob Zuma. We will not be happy, of course, But if it happens, let it be.
What will you do?
History will judge us. That is why we said from the beginning, we will do everything within the confines of the law. As MKMVA, we have warned the African National Congress that we don't want to see civil war in South Africa. I was called before the Integrity Commission that I'm inciting civil war.
But do you think that's what will happen in the event he gets arrested?
I don't know how people will react. I cannot control our people. I'm speaking on behalf of MKMVA that our programs as MKMVA to show our support to the president. We might, under normal conditions, when the regulations allow, we might so through demonstrations and demanding his release. So we'll do everything within the confines of the law.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening, Kevin Mopatswa, who is the leader of the MKMVA. And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Do join us again tomorrow evening. Have a good night.